We all heard songs, stories, legends, and gossip, especially across social media, around celebrities, politicians, and elites who sold their souls to the devil. And it seems to be one of humanity's most potent myths, right? A bargain with darkness, promise of power for a price later. But could such a thing actually be done? Now, to answer this, we must go deeper, obviously, because the question of can we sell our soul rests on two assumptions. First, that the soul itself is a thing we own. And second, that there is some being out there ready to buy our soul. Let's look at both. Of course, there's no better way to start than by explaining what soul really is. And let's start with the definitions across the globe. According to the world's greatest religions, the soul is described not as an object that we possess, but as our very own being, as the uncreated spark of the infinite, as the being of all beings, as the God within. So in Christianity, they call it the breath of God, which is breathed into Adam. In Islam, they call it the Ruh, from my spirit. In Kabbalah, they call it Neshama, a spark of Ein Sof. In Hinduism, they call it the Atman, unborn, undying, internally one with Brahman. And even Buddhism, though Buddhism does deny a permanent self and soul as such, but even in Buddhism, they still speak of Buddha-like nature, this luminous awareness beyond birth and beyond death. Gnosticism calls it divine spark hidden in matter, and Hermeticism calls it a fragment of the all. A fragment that basically descends through the spheres to learn and then rises back clothed in wisdom. Many of us have heard times and times again that modern spirituality speaks of the soul as of the higher self, source experiencing itself. And in the language of five bodies, which is the language that I use, the soul is the fifth body in the actual animating reality of all five bodies. So physical, emotional, mental, energetic, and spiritual. It's basically God remembering itself through us. So bearing in mind that this is what the soul is, we cannot sell it. The same way we cannot sell air, ocean, sunlight, we cannot sell God. We cannot sell what we are. We can obscure it, we can forget it, we can entangle its expression, but the essence itself remains perfect. Now, as we define the soul, let's do the same with the devil. You know, that popularly imagined horned creature on a fiery throne that rules over hell. That same creature that does not exist. That image grew from medieval art, from folklore, from Dante's Inferno. And in the Bible, Satan, Lucifer, is not originally a rival god, but an adversary, a tester, a role, a character. So whereas the devil, as we think of it, does not exist, what does exist are low vibrational entities, such as parasitic thought forms, such as egregores, such as contrastual forces. And those entities tempt, manipulate, they feed on attention and on life force. They catalyze growth by testing our own discernment. But they cannot own or buy the spark, the soul, the essence. So the question is still valid. Who would we even sell our soul to? And the answer is pretty apparent. No one. There's no cosmic marketplace for souls. And even though negative entities do exist, devil does not as we think of it, these tales of selling the soul have been permeated through cultures across the globe. So my honest opinion is that these myths exist to dramatize the moral compromise, to warn and not to describe a literal transaction. So in Europe, we have Faust, who was a scholar who craved ultimate knowledge and pleasure. So he made a pact with Mephistopheles. For some time, he enjoyed everything, but then when his time was up, his soul was claimed. And then in American blues, we've heard of Robert Johnson, who was said to have gone to a crossroads at midnight where a dark figure tuned his guitar, and after that encounter he played with an unearthly brilliance. So the legend goes that he has traded his soul for fame. In the Arabian Nights, we have a fisherman who bargains with not the devil but the jinn, who then grants treasures but completely twists a fisherman's wishes and kind of basically ruins him. In England, we have the monkey's paw that also grants exactly that which you wish, but it always comes with severe consequences. And in Afro-Caribbean traditions, we have those rituals and tales, cautionary tales, with the same themes of bargaining with spirits for basically worldly gain. Now, in medieval Europe, as you know, we have tales of the witches that were allegedly signing pacts with the devil himself in blood. And everywhere across the globe, this story repeats: a pact, a gift, and a terrible cost. But these myths dramatize the temptation to trade internal truth for temporary reward. These are cautionary tales, not cosmic contracts. Whereas there's no devil and there's no selling our soul, there are pacts that exist and that people, especially celebrities, politicians and elites, do practice. And this is what I want to talk about. So what really happens when someone is selling their soul is not selling their soul. It's what happens is an entanglement of energy, of attention, and of free will. Mystics across the globe will describe these pacts, several kinds of them actually, in a different way. And I want to talk about those today. So first, we have conscious ritual pacts, which are, of course, related to rituals and ceremonies, which, a deliberate ceremony where a person knowingly petitions a spirit or an entity or an archetype. So, for example, someone who really wants fame sets up a ritual at home, they prepare the ingredients, they draw a sigil, they light candles, they call a name or an entity from a grimoire, and they say, if you grant me X, I will offer you Y. And offerings can be incenses, food, blood, sexual energy, or specific acts, such as publishing the entity's name, doing certain deeds, even sometimes sacrificing certain people in their life. Now, needless to say, who does this? Those are occultists, ritual magicians, and desperate people who seek power, fame, money, and sometimes even love. So behind these rituals, there's always a desire for wealth, for love, for revenge, for beauty, for influence. Now, needless to say that the consequences are severe. And whereas there is, if the ritual is performed right, an increased synchronicity in events, and it seems like things are going for them and in their favor, but also they are risking life force drainage, obsession, misfortune, psychic backlash, because the entity may fulfill what was asked of it, but can twist the outcome, and needless to say, it often does. Now, after just ceremonies and rituals, we have crossroads and threshold rituals, which are typically performed at liminal spaces such as crossroads, cemeteries, rivers. And this is where people bury tokens, they play music, they leave offerings. And for example, Afro-Caribbean traditions, leaving rum and cigars for Papalegba, which is one of the entities at the crossroads to help with the travel, to bless the open roads, right? And who does that? Mostly folk practitioners, musicians, people who are seeking inspiration or opportunity. It's not necessarily always dark. It can also be a protective kind of practice. Of course, those are people who want, protection, luck. They are hoping to get some skills and so on and so forth. Now, the consequences here also exist because, yes, the offering may be done respectfully, but what can be a result, what can come up as a result is
obsession, unintended obligations, or even the rage of the entity that was called upon. And then, of course, without grounding, we can risk on actually calling in or blessing someone else and not the intended entity. Now, the third part of the equation, so to speak, would be blood offerings and sex magic, which is where they use blood or sexual energy to charge intent, right? Because as we know, sexual energy is creative energy and blood propels everything. So they're combining these two very potent ingredients to reach their goal, which means, people who do that are advanced ritualists, mostly secret societies, and some very desperate individuals. And as I said, blood and sex are very potent carriers of life force. However, grave consequences are usually met because those powerful effects can also cause energy depletion, psychic entanglement with partners, with entities, with anyone surrounding them. And it can actually result in an obsession as well. So then we have repetition or obsession, which is where people don't actually perform any kind of ritual. They're just living in constant fear, rage, greed, lust. And that creates previously mentioned egregores, which are thought forms that behave like a being. And needless to say, whoever is stuck in addiction, hate, or obsession is potentially creating egregores, which are those unconscious entities that are, conscious entities that are feeding off of the one who created them. Now, this is why sometimes people can feel possessed by egregores and can have energy loss, distorted perception, and so on and so forth. Now, needless to say, trauma bonds play a part as well, because everything that derives from chronic abuse, addiction, despair, repeated low frequency states is actually opening those cracks in the veil where parasitic energies can come in and latch on. Now, people may open those doors even unknowingly, right? We're talking about victims of abuse, once again, addicts, highly sensitive people, and not even open those doors voluntarily, but just as a byproduct of the traumas they have faced in their lives. And of course, consequences of this is that they feel owned, that they repeat patterns, that they have nightmares, anxiety, but this is all mostly healable through therapy and spiritual cleansing. And then, of course, we have ancestral or collective contracts, which include family curses, the vows of poverty, archetypes of servitude, for example, and basically acting out the contracts that have been passed down through the lineage. Of course, then the entire lineage has to endure the same faith, so to speak. And this is because of the most of the time combination of unresolved trauma and collective vows. Now, of course, the consequences are those unexplained blocks. You can't get promoted no matter what you do. You cannot be financially stable no matter how hard you try. And this is where we need to dive into our subconscious mind to understand it, what is happening, and to consciously release those blockages. And then something that most secret societies do are those group egregores and service oaths, which is basically where those secret societies, cults, and even corporations sometimes demand loyalty oaths or secrecy, right? And they kind of have these group rituals that form powerful, very powerful egregores that drain life force of other people. And the people who create those rituals and who obtain those rituals are, of course, always initiates of the esoteric orders, members of the destructive cults, and even, most of the time employees bound by the extreme NDAs. Now, the goal is to harness the collective energy toward a goal, with that goal is most of the time to preserve power and control. Now, the consequences: complete loss of individuality, difficulty leaving, feeling energetically hooked even after you do leave, and once again, unfortunately, sacrifices of family ties by either betraying or cutting off loved ones to prove the loyalty to the sect, sacrificing sanity through trauma-bonded rituals, through sleep deprivation, through substance abuse, sacrificing empathy to climb the hierarchy, sacrificing health, privacy, freedom for secrecy. And all of these ways are basically all of these ways are ways of leasing out our attention, our vitality, our life force. So it's like kind of renting rooms in your psychic house, right? So you still own the house, and every single pact can be undone through awareness, through naming, through purification, through prayer, through meditation, and through sincere return to source. Once again, this is all happening. None of that has anything to do with selling your soul.
That absolutely no one, including celebrities, including politicians, including elites, no one can escape karma. And everyone will pay for their sins on their own accord. Of course, I'm talking about after death, because when the body dies, that numbness that was caused with this unholy lifestyle will die as well. So even though in this lifetime people can silence their conscience, they can fragment their soul, or try to fragment their soul, better said, and they can normalize the darkness, but in death there are no distractions, there are no substance, there are no rituals, there's no hierarchy to hide behind, and the consciousness is laid bare. And this is where the punishment begins, because all traditions described one thing in different languages, but the essence of the message is the same, which is the soul faces itself. So, for example, in Tibetan Buddhism, the soul enters so-called bardo, and there the soul undergoes a panoramic review, right? They don't only see, but they also feel the full impact of every single action. So if you, for example, cause joy, you're going to feel that joy as your own. If you've caused pain, you're going to feel that pain as your own. And this is not punishment, but just the revelation of the natural truth, right? And so, of course, for those who have misused occult sciences to inflict great harm, the experience is going to be excruciating, because every suppressed fragment of conscience will come back rushing back at once. And then we have Kabbalah, where the soul passes through Gehinnom. And this is not how we're taught, like internal hellfire, but basically process of purification. So all of the distortions, greed, cruelty, manipulation, they're all burned away like dross from gold, right? And the longer the soul resisted the awareness in their life, the harsher the fire will feel, because once again, nothing can be numbed anymore. And of course, most of us are familiar with the Christian mysticism and the notion of purgatory, where every attachment that isn't aligned with divine love is stripped away, and then all those masks and all those identities just crumble, right? Power, status, wealth, none of it can follow. And really what remains is the naked soul, which is purified through suffering until nothing but love is left. Hinduism mentions the law of karma, which basically tells us that whatever harm we've inflicted comes back to us in a cycle of rebirth. So a tyrant may be reborn as the oppressed times and times again. And manipulator is going to choose to be reborn as a powerless person. All those lives of hardships and limitations are chosen by the soul itself to restore the balance, to kind of purify itself, to taste what the soul has denied to others. And of course, the more we know in this life, the sharper the purification will feel. So needless to say, to act in ignorance is one thing, right? But to know of karma, to study the sacred law, as many elites do, and still to abuse others, magnifies the weight of what was done. So this is why those elites who do have an access to hidden texts and rituals will not escape the purification
and what the condemnation, but they will actually face it even more intensely. And after death, there is reintegration that's happening. So all of the fragments of the self that have been numbed or silenced, they do come flooding back. The soul remembers every single part that it cut off to quote unquote survive. For some, this reunion is a blissful experience. For others, it's going to be torment because they're going to need to refeel everything they've suppressed. So this is why the death is often known as the great equalizer, right? So no matter how many rituals one performed to delay karma, no matter how many sacrifices one made to project consequences onto other people, in death, all debts return to their source. So the soul, just to conclude everything, the soul cannot be sold. It can be delayed, it can be distorted, it can be partly fragmented. And that does come at a cost. That does come at a heavier, sharper purification after death. So when people imagine that, elites, they're going to escape the justice forever, they won't. They won't. Cosmic law is patient, not absent. And what is avoided in one lifetime is going to be magnified in the next one, and the one after that, and the one after that. The deal with the devil never ends. It doesn't exist, but if it would, it never would end well, not because the devil would own the soul, but because the soul can never really run from itself. And that's the God's honest truth.